Clocks have started. Pragg opens the game with 1c4, the English opening. Now let's see what Nodirbek responds back with. This is the first game that Pragg has with the white pieces. He's played two blacks here until now against Gukesh and Caruana, and both of them were quite exciting encounters. G6 played here by Nodirbek. He wants to put his bishop on G7. And Pragg says, well, now I'm happy to transpose this into a d4 opening. He pushes his pawn to d4. And Nodirbek brings his knight out to f6. Wow, we are in for a fight here. Knight to c3. Is this going to be a King's Indian with bishop g7 and e4, where white captures the center? No, it's the Grunfeld defense with d5. Knight comes out to f3. And Nodirbek here most likely will play his bishop to g7. Yes, he puts his bishop on g7. And now Pragg can take on d5, knight d5 and e4, which is the main line. But he goes bishop g5, which is also a very exciting line. Very interesting line here. And the main move by far is to just jump with your knight on e4. And here's a small trap that I want to show you if Nodirbek does play knight e4. Yes, he does. Knight e4 on the board. And now if you take here, then I take on g5, and play e6, attacking this knight and this knight. It's a very well-known trap in the position. Anyway, Pragg's never going to fall into it. This bishop here is attacked. You can go back to h4 or f4. He comes back to f4, putting it on this diagonal here. Now, notice the pawn on d5 is attacked twice. So generally black would take on c3. But the new way to play short castles is that after you take here, even if you are pawn up, I push my pawn in the center, opening up the queen. And this is excellent compensation for black. Which is why Praggnanandhaa pushes his pawn to e3. He's like, I know Nodirbek, you're very well prepared. Now, with my center a little bit defended, I am threatening to take here. So take my knight. And Nodirbek here doesn't. He pushes c5. This is what Grunfeld is all about, guys. You give up this pawn, but you are attacking the center here. Knight c6. And black has, again, excellent compensation here. Wow. In the spirit of Grunfeld here is Nodirbek Abdusattorov playing. Pragg takes the d5 pawn with his own pawn. And he's like, now your knight is hanging. Nodirbek can even ignore this and bring his bishop out. Continue development. But the other option, of course, is to take on c3, and he takes it. Knight takes c3 is taken. And now pawn takes c3, very likely, yes. Pawn takes, and now queen to d5. I think Nodirbek just trying to be certain about his choices. Queen takes d5. He has 1 hour 10 minutes. Meanwhile, Praggnanandhaa at 1 hour 31 minutes. Pragg is maybe one of the best prepared players in the chess circuit right now. Bishop e2 played. Very interesting pawn structure we have on the board, guys. Pawn takes pawn. You can see now Pragg will take with the pawn. He has an excellent structure here, 5-1 versus this structure, and he brings his knight out. Other option was to give a check. When playing this endgame is also a very interesting possibility. But anyway, he went knight c6, Pragg castles here. Bishop to f5. Black has a long-term advantage in the endgame with an outside pawn majority, but to get it rolling is not so easy. And h4 here by Pragg. This is modern chess, guys. In the olden days, someone would have played rook c1, queen a4, moves like that. But h4, and one starts to think, what is h4 all about? It's not about attack, right? It's not that you're going to mate this king. You don't even have so many pieces here. Your own king is castled, so you don't even have the rook here. Why has Pragg played the move h4 is the big question. And Nodirbek also has the same question. He's like, I'm not touching this pawn here. I'm just going here. And Pragg pushes even further. In fact, this time he's even ready to give up a pawn with gh5, but of course it would make the black structure a little bit weird and ugly. So he just brings his rook. Look at Nodirbek. While Pragg has been spending time pushing his h-pawn, Nodirbek has brought his rooks into the center of the board. And now pawn to h6, attacking the bishop on g7. This just takes a lot of space in the black camp. Bishop f6 played. And queen to a4. Fantastic. This is just nice move coming out from the d file. And this pawn to h6, is this an asset or is this a liability? This entire idea, h4, h5, h6, is it worth investing 3 moves into it? Praggnanandhaa is like, I'm going to take your queen. Knight takes a5, taken. And the game has now moved into an endgame where the move pawn on h6 might not look that relevant once again. Pragg brings his rook to c1, stopping the black rook from entering into c2. And what will Nodirbek play now? Here. He brings his knight back to c6. Maybe threatening knight to b4. When the knight could jump to c2, to d3, attack the a2 pawn. And Pragg here comes back, pushes his pawn to a3. You know, now the knight can no longer jump here. Little moves. e5 is difficult to engineer because the knight and bishop and pawn are controlling it. So white has some sort of a bind. But Nodirbek is like, I don't know what it means because I'm just playing e6. And when your knight moves away, I'll push e5. Now Pragg has to decide what to do. He goes knight to g5. The knight here is very well placed, looking at these squares, but he's left the control of the e5 square. Isn't e5 possible now? Also, you have to be careful. If you don't do anything, g4 is coming in to trap the bishop. So e5 is the most logical move here. Praggnanandhaa was okay allowing it, and you can see Pragg did use a lot of time for that decision, because allowing your opponent the e5 break could well be helping him to equalize the position. Pawn takes pawn, and now knight takes pawn here. So black looks to be doing very, very well now. You can see this bishop can enter here. The knight is looking here. It's all looking pretty good for Nodirbek. Pragg takes on c8. Okay. Rook takes c8 played. And now Nodirbek plays, what is his move going to be? Rook takes c8. He takes. And now you can take the d file. That's a small win for white here. And very important to notice that you can't move your rook in, because later on I'll take, and there's a mate here. And this is what the h6 pawn is doing to black. Black would have loved to not have this pawn here, because now what is happening, by the way, bishop e7, a very interesting move, because if you take on e5, I can take on g5. So it's not really hanging on e5. What this pawn on h6 is doing is effectively tying down the black rook to the last rank. It's not letting the rook move. And now Pragg has a very strong move up his sleeve, and he finds it. e4 is an absolutely superb, sublime move. I mean, there's no other way to describe it. Really. e4. What a move this is. Now think about it. Bishop takes knight. Your bishop is hanging, so there's no time to take on f5. So you must take back bishop g5. And by the way, Pragg has 29 minutes, Nodirbek 35 minutes, and Nodirbek even wins a pawn here. He's like a clean pawn up. But what has Pragg gotten in return? the dark squared bishop is gone. So the dark squares have become even further weak. Bishop f6. Attacking here the knight on e5. Knight goes back to c6. And now rook d7 coming in. This is what Pragg wanted. He wanted a way to get in, and for that, he's even ready to give up a pawn. Isn't that simply incredible? This rook d7 move is just beautiful. Beautiful move by Pragg, attacking on d7 and f7. And Nodirbek now is saying to Pragg, hey, look, your knight, get your rook out of here. I'm defending this pawn here with my bishop. I know that you want to come bishop c4 and attack my weakness on f7, but I'm not going to let you do that. I'll just put my bishop on d5 square, and I'm a pawn up. You don't have enough compensation here. Well, that's the discussion between white and black right now. Does white have enough compensation for the missing pawn? I love this move that Pragg has played, bishop g7. It just limits this king's path completely. It cannot move. Also, pushing the pawn just weakens the entire 7th rank, so you don't want to do that. Nodirbek goes rook d8. His rook is well placed here on d8. He can't move his rook away, as we have discussed. There's a check that could come in. And now Praggnanandhaa goes bishop b5. Oh, I get it. Maybe Pragg wants to go from e8 to attack here, although the pawn is defended. Not so easy here for Nodirbek, but also for Pragg to make inroads, also not so simple. a6, bishop a4. Look at how Pragg's playing this. He's keeping an eye here, okay? And if you want to get rid of the bishop by b5, which Nodirbek does, he does weaken the entire 7th rank. a6 is weak. The entire position gets a bit soft. And of course, Pragg can bring his bishop back to c2. He brings it back to d1. No tactics here with bg2, king g2, rook d1, because just rook e8 is a checkmate. That's the problem for black. Knight comes out to c6, and Nodirbek is like, now I have moved my pawns, my knight is well placed, my bishop is well placed, rook is well placed. What next, Pragg? Well, Pragg goes rook c7. He attacks the knight here on c6. And Nodirbek just adjusts the knight. Sorry, guys, for slight lagging in the video. This comes from actually the video itself that was sent to us. Bishop e6 played. He brings his bishop back to e6, but this is a mistake. He could have played knight a5. The position was still tough. But now Pragg has to make a very important decision, which is to take on c6, allowing opposite colored bishop endgame with rook d1 check. And this is such a tough decision to make. But Pragg does it. Pragg's understanding of this endgame is absolutely stunning. Rook d1 takes here, king h2, played, and now rook takes on a6. Is threatened. He comes back because there was also a back rank issue, although this was not defended. This was defended on c8. Pragg takes it. Now you have equal pawns. And what Nodirbek essentially is thinking is that, hey, look, I'll just put my bishop on c4. Right? That's what he does. I'm defending b5. I'm defending f7. I'm just completely better here. I mean, I'm completely fine. There's no way that Pragg is going to get in with his king because he has dark square control, I have light square control. But Pragg thinks differently. He plays rook a7. And for Pragg, it's like the amount of opportunities in this position are limitless. He can bring up his king here. He can push his pawns here. He can bring them up. There are many, many possibilities. He pushes his pawn to f3. And I will be very curious to see how Pragg tries to play for a win. Of course, rook a8, very nice move by Nodirbek. If you take, this is an instant draw. There's no discussion even. You need to keep your active rook on the board if you want to win here. Pragg goes rook d7. He attacks the bishop. And now Nodirbek plays bishop to c4. He puts his bishop on the c4 square. And rook to b7 played. Attacking here and on f7. The rook comes to e8. And Nodirbek does look a bit nervous there. He's looking at Pragg, and Pragg simply brings his king up. King g3 played. And rook a8. Now the rook keeps an eye on the a3 pawn, but it can never take it because there's a mate. So white can simply bring the king up even one step further. Pragg decides to bring the king to f2. And here's the thing about Pragg. In the endgame, if you want to become a good endgame player, what you need to do is not rush. Like if your idea is that your king will go to f4 someday, then g5, then f6, you don't always have to go the fastest route when your opponent has no play. You see, Nodirbek has no play here. It's much better to spend time. Look at this, bishop e5. Now, what's the purpose of this move? Well, of course, it tempts him to take and give a checkmate, but Pragg knows that Nodirbek's not falling for this trick. So what is his idea here is to just place the bishop on a good central square. Rook c8. And this bishop can now control here, also here. We're on move 43 now. Both players got extra 30 minutes on the clock. You can see Nodirbek has 44 minutes. Pragg goes back to g7. He's just exercising his domination of the position. Here. Rook a8 played. And now Pragg, what does he do next? Because Nodirbek has these three squares where he can constantly keep moving the rook. He has these squares for his bishop where he can constantly keep moving. g4, the kingside play has begun. Okay. And Nodirbek brings the rook to e8. And now king to g3. The king comes up. Bishop comes to e2. This bishop is actually looking at both the pawns. And will Pragg push his pawn to f4? Yes, he pushes forward. f4 on the board. It's still unclear to all of us what is Pragg's next idea going to be. He goes rook a8. And now the threat is rook takes pawn with a check. And then snatching the pawn and going back. Yes, king h4. He wants to come to g5. Step by step. Pragg making that little progress. But Nodirbek still unimpressed. He's like, I'm moving my rook here. What is on your mind, Pragg? Tell me. And Pragg goes king g5. He brings his king into the game. like the hand and the shadow of death. Pragg's pieces keep moving forward step by step. Bishop d3. Okay. Now, what's the next plan? It's a step-by-step plan that Praggnanandhaa is executing. You see, he wants to push f5, I believe. But again, bishop e5. Wait, what's the hurry? Let's do it calmly. Bishop e5. Nodirbek is going to go either rook e8 or rook e8. Rook e8 on the board. Pragg now plays his bishop to d6. One thing that this bishop is doing here is it's taking away the square on f8. So it could park itself on e7. Bishop c4. And so now bishop e7, king f6, and suddenly the rook is even more passive. But still the f7 point is guarded. Where's your next breakthrough? Pragg is now thinking hard for the next idea here, and I think it's f5. The main point of f5 is once you threaten to take here. Yes, f5 on the board. You threaten to take. Now imagine some move from black. Let's say rook c8, rook a8, because black anyway has to wait. Yes, he plays rook c8. Now if you take, he cannot take fg. Has to take hg. But maybe black is fine here because this pawn is defended. So maybe Pragg taking here isn't the correct idea. He has to still wait. He goes bishop e5. Puts his bishop again on a good square. And Nodirbek here plays rook to e8. Pragg goes rook to d7. I love how Pragg, makes his moves with so much conviction, calmness, patience. 15 minutes for Pragg, 32 for Nodirbek. He is just moving his rook from e8 to c8. And now Pragg plays bishop f6. Well, you can continue with rook e8, but this time fg, hg already has h7, king takes, and rook d1 with a mating idea. Oh my god. So Nodirbek gets a bit worried and takes on f5 because of this entire threat. Wow. Pragg is an absolute genius here. With rook d7, he actually was planning to switch this way. Man, what a guy. Takes, but now the G file has opened up and Nodirbek is trying to run away with king f8. Pragg goes rook b7. Now what Pragg is super happy about is the fact that not only is his rook attacking this way, it could someday go from here and attack from this side. So rook 8. Bishop e7 check by Pragg, And maybe he's coming in with his king e8. Okay, you can't go. Maybe you can, right? King here. If you give a check, I have king g7. Wow. Comes back bishop b4. He takes away this square from the king. He's coming in this way. Oh my goodness. The way in which Praggnanandhaa has outplayed his opponent is just incredible. Now rook a6, trying to take away the king's entry path from here. But what he has missed absolutely is check and rook swing. And Pragg is like, hey Nodirbek, that's something that I've seen some many moves ago. Rook b8, king d7, and now just rook h8. And that is game over. The arbiter comes in with a new score sheet as they are on move 61. Pragg plays rook h8, attacking the h7 pawn. There's no way to defend it. You're going to lose that very crucial pawn, and the h pawn is just 2 steps away from queening. No counterplay here. Nodirbek resigns. What a game by Pragg. What a game. Guys, hats off to Praggnanandhaa's entire endgame. And guys, this h6 pawn which stood there, really, what a pawn this has been. And he's saying about bishop e6, giving up, the c6 knight was not a good idea. True, maybe that's true. He shouldn't have gone into this opposite colored bishop endgame with the rooks on board where Nodirbek had no counterplay. But then again, his position was not at all great. Pragg's opening prep, this idea with h4, h5, h6 combined with the e4 break later, giving up a pawn to get the rook in, using his 2 bishops, dark squared weaknesses, then bringing his king into the game, using his kingside pawns, creating mating ideas. Beautiful play. Beautiful play. I would rate this as one of the most amazing grinds in the world of chess. And to beat a player like Nodirbek, who is 27-71 in this style, goes to show what an amazing positional player Pragg is. And hats off to Pragg. Kudos to him. He's now in the joint lead in the tournament with 2 out of 3. And along with Fabiano Caruana, we're looking for more